This confrontation in a room full of power didn't need a single shout to leave everyone speechless. But what one young man was about to say would ignite it all in under 10 seconds. The truth is, real power doesn't announce itself, it waits. It lets the noise rise and fall, and when silence returns, that's when it speaks in a language that changes everything. Are moments that define legacies, not through laws passed, but through character revealed in a flash. It began as a standard evening among political giants. Yet it became the night the youngest in the Trump family learned a lesson about grace and gravity the hard way. The venue was packed with power brokers and history itself. Think of the most exclusive dinner you can imagine, where every whisper could be tomorrow's headline. The air hummed with a tense expectancy, a low-grade electricity that made the hairs on your neck stand up. Everyone in attendance understood they were not just spectators, but witnesses to an inevitable collision of titans. The room was a pressure cooker, and the release valve was nowhere to be seen. In the front row sat three figures who each represented a distinct philosophy of power. Barack Obama, the voice of measured intellect, the calm strategist who built his influence with words and reason. Across from him, Donald Trump, the embodiment of forceful confrontation, who built his empire and presidency on shattering norms and owning the spotlight. And beside him, Barron Trump, young, watchful, a vessel for expectation, carrying a surname that was its own kind of weight, a legacy that demanded performance. You could see it in his posture, trying to project the confidence of his father, but with the eyes of a young man still mapping the terrain of his own identity. He was on display, and he knew it. The stage was set not just for a debate of ideas, but for a generational transfer of a very specific kind of warfare. The dimmed, and the host took the stage, offering a nervous welcome that did little to ease the tension. It was the kind of voice that cracked slightly, betraying the understanding that he was standing between tectonic plates. The first speaker was introduced, and the ritual began. Barack Obama walked to the podium with a calm that seemed to slow the room itself. It wasn't a walk of arrogance but of possession. He owned the space he occupied simply by being in it. He nodded, a simple acknowledging gesture, thanked the crowd with genuine warmth, and began to speak. His topic was the crushing, invisible weight carried by everyday families. He didn't speak in abstract percentages or political jargon. He painted pictures with his words. He spoke of the silent dread of a checking account that never quite balanced, the grocery cart that grew lighter as prices climbed higher, the sleepless nights of a parent calculating mortgage payments against medical bills. He connected cold policy to palpable human strain, making the economic feel deeply, achingly personal. His voice was a steady river, pulling the audience into a shared sense of urgency and empathy. A nation's strength, he said, his eyes scanning the room, connecting with individuals, isn't measured by its loudest voices, but by the quiet resilience of its people. It's in the hands that keep working when hope is thin, and in the hearts that choose community over chaos. The line landed not as a soundbite, but as a truth. The applause that followed was respectful, deep, a rolling wave of acknowledgement that came from the gut, not just polite hands. Cameras flashed like distant lightning, capturing Obama's composed exit from the stage. He had laid down a marker of empathy, but the energy in the room was already splitting, a single cell dividing into opposing forces. In the front row, Donald Trump sat perfectly still, a monument of disagreement. His arms were crossed, a fortress against the message, and his gaze was a fixed, unblinking point on the now empty podium. The silent critique was deafening. You could feel his rebuttal forming in the stillness. He then leaned over, the movement sharp and deliberate, and whispered something to his son. It wasn't a long conversation, it was an instruction. Barron listened, and his lips curled into the faintest, most practiced smirk. It was a tiny gesture, but in that high-definition world, it was a declaration of war. The host, sensing the shift, cleared his throat, his voice tightening as he stepped back to the mic and announced the next speaker. The parenthesis of peace was closed. Unquestioned next would flip the script from a debate of ideas to a direct personal assault. The rules of engagement had just been torn up. Trump approached the microphone not as a speaker, but as a challenger entering a ring. His posture radiated defiance, his shoulders squared against the preceding message. "That was a lovely story," he began, his tone dripping with a sarcasm so thick it was almost tangible. "A beautiful, heartwarming story, but stories don't pay the bills." And with that, he launched his offensive. He took the very economic anxieties Obama had just made human and, with surgical precision, repackaged them as weapons. He pinpointed each pain point, the gas prices, the job uncertainty, the border chaos, and laid them firmly, unambiguously, at the feet of the previous administration. "Leadership is accountability," Trump boomed, his voice filling the hall. "Not elegant excuses. It's about standing up and saying, 'This was my fault,' not pointing fingers at the clouds." The room polarized in real time, a visible schism running down the center aisle. Some clapped, a staccato rhythm of agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their plush chairs, looking at their laps or exchanging worried glances. Throughout this torrent, Obama sat, not slouched, not defeated, but present. His hands were folded in his lap, a picture of stillness. His expression was unreadable, not blank, but deeply contained. It was the face of a man listening to a translation of a language he understood, but did not speak. Trump, energized by the division he was manifesting, began to pace slightly behind the podium. He spoke of victories, of battles won against a swamp that resisted him, of being a disruptor in a palace of whispers. He turned, his body angling toward where Obama sat. "You can sound very thoughtful," he said, the words like shards of glass. "You can use all the right, careful words. But talk is the cheapest commodity in this city. It's action that builds. It's results that matter." The jab landed in the stomach of the room. Yet Obama's response was not a flinch, but a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of mockery. It was the smile of a chess player who sees his opponent's next 10 moves. That smile seemed to short-circuit Trump's momentum. For a beat, just a fraction of a second, he hesitated. The rhythm broke. And in that void, he made a critical, miscalculated move. He turned from the audience, from his rival, and gestured broadly to his son. "Barron," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone that the microphone still caught. "You've been listening. You have a thought. Share it. Tell them what you see." It was a command disguised as an invitation. All eyes, every lens, every ounce of tension in the room snapped to the young man. The room fell into a silence so complete, so heavy, you could hear the rustle of a silk dress, the click of a pen cap miles away. It was the silence of a collective, held breath. Trump leaned into the microphone, his youthful face suddenly aged by the gravity of the spotlight. His voice, when it came, was a surprise. It was cool, clear, and deliberately sharp. A scalpel trying to mimic a sledgehammer. "It's easy to preach unity," he started. each word measured and placed like a stone. When you spent 8 years practicing the art of division. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and recognition. He continued, his eyes, now emboldened, briefly meeting Obama's across the distance. And let's be honest, he added, a condescending tilt to his head. Some people in this country still have legitimate questions about the very foundations of certain leaders, about where it all really began. The insinuation, that old, discredited, and poisonous rumor about birthplace and legitimacy, hung in the air for exactly 9 seconds. It wasn't just a political jab, it was the resurrection of a personal, racialized ghost. Trump Sr. looked on, a glint of pride in his eyes, the father seeing the son wield the family sword. Barron leaned back, as if satisfied with his strike, a boy who believes he has just felled a giant with a pebble. The discomfort in the hall condensed into a thick, suffocating fog. A line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. Obama, however, remained a statue of stillness. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away in shame or anger. He simply received the words, let them hang in the toxic air, and then he let the silence expand. He gave it space. He allowed the weight of that cheap shot to become unbearable, not for him, but for the people who had launched it and the audience that had witnessed it. He let the shame transfer. And then, when the moment had reached its absolute peak of tension, when the room felt it might snap, he moved. Slowly, with a terrifying calm, he stood. He didn't rush. There was no theatrical pushback of the chair. He simply rose, a mountain deciding to make itself known. He walked to the microphone, each step measured and silent, and let his gaze settle not on the father, but on the son. He focused on Barron with an intensity that was both gentle and devastating. I've been in this arena a long time, Obama began, his voice soft yet piercing, a laser in the fog. Long enough to have heard every kind of tactic, every strategy from the noble to the nihilistic. And I'll tell you this, mocking a man's origin, questioning the soil from which he grew, doesn't elevate your own. It just reveals the poverty of your own argument. He paused, letting that fundamental truth settle into the bones of everyone listening. It was a principle, stated plainly. Then he turned his focus, his tone shifting from general to painfully specific, from principled to almost sorrowful. What you just did, young man, isn't conviction. It's not even your own political belief. It's an impression. It's a performance. You've adopted the tone, the cadence, the confrontational rhythm. But you lack the wisdom, the lived, earned wisdom that should temper it. You have the echo, but not the voice. The hall was frozen. You could see people leaning forward, unconsciously, drawn in by the gravity of this correction. Obama continued, his eyes locked on Barron's. You stand there and you challenge where I come from. You try to use my story as a weapon. So let me ask you a question in return, one that might actually require a thought of your own. Do you know where you come from? He let the question hang for a breath, for two, allowing its multiple meanings to bloom, biological, ethical, historical. Then, he delivered the line that would define the night. His voice didn't rise. It became quieter, more precise. Are you the son of Ivanka or of Melania? The sentence wasn't shouted. It was almost whispered. But it hit the room with the force of a physical blow. A collective, audible gasp sucked the oxygen from the space. It was a question that laid bare the tangled, performative web of the Trump family dynamic. It wasn't about maternity, it was about identity. It asked, in this scripted drama, which role are you playing? Whose lines are you speaking? Barron's confident facade didn't just crack, it shattered. The practiced cool evaporated. His face, just moments ago smug, went pale, draining of blood and bravado. His eyes, wide with shock and dawning humiliation, flickered from Obama to his father, seeking rescue, guidance, an exit. But he found no rescue there. Donald Trump's expression had darkened into a storm of pure, unadulterated anger. This was not part of the script. The attack had been turned back on his family, and it had found its mark with devastating accuracy. The patriarch leaned over, his face close to his son's ear, and hissed a command that was audible to the first few rows. "Go to the car, now, move!" It was a dismissal that was itself a humiliation. Barron, utterly exposed and adrift, stood. The movement was stiff, robotic. He didn't look at anyone. He turned and walked, a solitary figure, through the aisle of staring eyes and silent judgment, every slow step toward the exit echoing like a funeral march. The spectacle of his retreat was more powerful than any rebuttal. Obama had not just won the argument, he had dissolved the opposition. But Obama wasn't finished. He hadn't come for the son alone. He turned to the audience, becoming a teacher for the entire room. "This," he said, his words measured now, each one a deliberate stone placed on a scale, "is what happens when insult becomes a family tradition. When disrespect is passed down like an heirloom. When you teach the next generation that cruelty is cleverness, that a personal wound is a political tactic, you don't build a legacy, you bankrupt it. You spend a moral capital that can never be replenished." He then shifted his gaze, finally, to Donald Trump, who was still reeling. "This pattern didn't start tonight. It started years ago. It flowed from you, to your children, to your surrogates. It's a legacy, but not one of strength. It's a legacy of transactional relationships." He took a breath, going in for the lesson that would transcend politics. "I recall a statement you once made publicly, one that many of us heard and recoiled from." Obama's voice dropped again, becoming solemn, forensic. "You said of your daughter, and I quote, 'If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.'" The disgust in the room this time was a palpable wave. It wasn't a gasp, it was a collective shudder. He had invoked not a policy failure, but a profound failure of character, a recorded moment that lived forever on the internet. "That," Obama said, letting the ugly words linger in the air he had just cleaned with truth, "is not pride. That is not love. That is a profound confusion. It is the reduction of a person, your own child, to an object of your own vanity. And that confusion, that toxic example, is the root. The insults, the mockery, the division, they are just the branches." Trump was visibly speechless, trapped in the glare of his own recorded voice, caught in a trap of his own making. He had no counter. How do you counter your own words? Obama brought the lesson home, his voice rising slightly, not in volume, but in warmth and inclusive gravity. "Leadership," he said, "isn't about the noise you make, it's about the dignity you keep, especially when others are losing theirs. It's about showing our children, by relentless example, that true strength respects. That power is most potent when it protects, when it lifts, even, especially, in disagreement." The applause began then. It didn't explode, it swelled. It started from a deep place within the audience and rolled forward, building, a wave of release and recognition. It was not raucous, but deep, rolling, and full of a shared realization about what they had just witnessed. Obama gave a slight, acknowledging nod. "Remember," he said, almost as an aside, a final piece of wisdom to take home. "The calmest person in the room, the one who controls his breath when others are losing theirs, is often the one in true command. He stepped away from the podium. He didn't drop the mic. He simply placed his hand on it for a moment, as if transferring the final lesson, and then he walked, unhurried and sure, toward the exit. He didn't look back. Not at the applause, not at his defeated rival. The cameras followed his calm, straight back as he moved through the doors, the crowd now rising to its feet in a standing ovation that was as much for the lesson as for the man. Donald Trump remained seated in the front row, a statue of furious impotence. He did not stand. He did not clap. He was an island of seething resentment in a sea of respect. The contrast in that single frame, the exiting grace, the static rage, was the entire story, summarized without a single word. Later, cable news analysts would dissect the policy mentions, the economic data points. But the world, the people watching clips on their phones, remembered the lesson. They remembered the visual of a young man, armed with borrowed malice, trying to play a man's game, and being disarmed not with louder fury, but with devastating, quiet truth. They saw the difference between aggression and authority, between noise and power. O's final act that night was a masterclass in emotional and psychological power. He demonstrated that sometimes the most commanding move is not to advance, but to stand your ground and let the other person's own momentum carry them over the cliff. It is to state the facts with clarity, expose the broken foundation of an argument, and then, having done so, to simply walk away with your soul and your dignity utterly intact. He showed that true victory is not in silencing the other, but in revealing the truth so plainly that the room silences itself to hear it. If this lesson in composure, in the sheer force of disciplined character resonated with you, then support this channel. Give this video a like and follow Winds of Thought for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world, the hidden dynamics of power, and the timeless principles that separate lasting influence from fleeting noise.